On the last day of the retreat, that is on Saturday, I think July the 7th, all Theravada monks will observe what is called rainy season retreat. Although it is called a retreat, it does not necessarily mean a meditation retreat. But monks are required to live within their monasteries during these 3 months of rainy season. And they are not to go out overnight unless there is an invitation. Even if there is an invitation and they go out overnight, they must go back to their monastery within 7 days. That means they can spend 6 nights outside the monastery and then they must go back to the monastery. And one day before that day, that is on Friday, people in Burma will celebrate the Buddha's giving of first sermon. Full moon days have a special significance for Theravada Buddhists because according to Theravada tradition, the important events in the life of the Buddha happened on full moon days. So his conception took place on full moon day of July, and he was born on full moon day of May. He became a Buddha on the full moon day of May, and also he died on the full moon day of May. After he became the Buddha, he spent 7 weeks under the Bodhi tree and in the vicinity of the Bodhi tree, the tree under which he became enlightened as a Buddha. And during the 8th week, he thought of teaching the Dhamma, and he decided to teach Dhamma to his former attendants or disciples who are a considerable distance from where he was living at that time. And according to the commentaries, he went to them on foot on the full moon day of July. And then in the evening of that day, he delivered his first sermon to the 5 disciples. And since it was his first sermon, it is important for students of Buddhism. And in that discourse, in the first sermon or first discourse, he briefly stated that those who have gone forth should not follow the path of sensual enjoyment on the one hand and self-mortification on the other. And he added that avoiding these 2 extremes, he had realized what he called the middle practice, which is popularly known as middle way. That means he discovered it, then he practiced it, and he became the Buddha as a result of that practice. And so now he was going to teach this middle way to his 5 disciples. And that middle way or middle practice is nothing but what is known as the Noble Eightfold Path. So the Noble Eightfold Path and the middle way are the same. And he also taught the Four Noble Truths in that discourse. In fact, the Noble Way is the fourth of these Four Noble Truths. And at the end of that teaching of the Four Noble Truths, one of the 5 disciples became enlightened as a Sotapanna. That means he reached the first stage of enlightenment. And then the deities cheered the discourse and the enlightenment of the disciple who was later known as Kondanya. And the other disciples became Sotapannas on the following days. And on the 5th day, after the full moon day, Buddha taught them another sutta called Sutta on Soullessness. And at the end of that sutta, they all became arahants. So, as this is the time of rainy seasons, and as the full moon day is in our retreat, in the course of our retreat, I would like to talk on the first sermon given by the Buddha. So at the beginning of the sermon, Buddha said that those who have gone forth should not follow either of the 2 extremes. Now, in order to understand why Buddha started talking about the 2 extremes and the middle way, we have to go back in his life, both before and after his renunciation. As most people know, Buddha was born as a prince. He was not yet the Buddha at that time. So his personal name was Siddhartha. So he was born as a prince, and his father was King Suddhodana, and his mother was Queen Mahamaya. And his mother, Queen Mahamaya, died 7 days after he was born, and so he was brought up by Queen Maya's sister named Pajapati Gautami. Buddha did not talk much about himself in the discourses, but here and there we can find references to his life. And in one of the discourses, he said that his father, the king, had 3 mansions built for him, 3 houses built for him, one suitable for living in winter and the others in summer and in rainy seasons. Now, there are only 3 seasons in that part of the world, so only 3 mansions were built for him, and so he lived in these mansions according to the time of the year. And also he said that he was attended upon by musicians, dancers, all of whom were females, and so that means that he led a luxurious life while he was a prince. Although he did not talk about his marriage, he had a son named Rahula, and so we can assume that he married Princess Yasodhara. So in the commentaries it is said that he was married at the age of 16, and the Buddha himself said that he renounced the world at the age of 29. So for 13 years he enjoyed the life of a prince. He enjoyed the life of sensual pleasures, luxurious life. And in the commentaries, it is said that he has all but forgotten his mission, deeply sunk in the enjoyment of worldly pleasures. But the deities could not wait any longer, and so they showed him what are called the four great signs. They are an old man, a sick man, a dead man, or a corpse, and a recluse. So they showed him when he was going to his pleasure garden. So on the way to his pleasure garden, he saw these signs, and since he hadn't seen an old man or a sick man or a dead corpse or a monk, he asked what they were, and his charioteer gave him answers. So he came to know that there is old age, there is sickness, and there is death. Now, his father, the king, did not like the idea that his son would become a Buddha. A Buddha means a recluse leading a homeless life. So his father wanted him to become a universal monarch. So he made arrangements so that the prince did not see any ugly sight, an old man or a sick man or whatever. So he wanted the prince to enjoy life and to see only the good things in life and to become a universal monarch. Now when the prince saw these signs shown by the deities, an old man, a sick man, a corpse, and last a recluse, and he came to see that there was old age, sickness and death, and he as a human being could not escape from getting old, being sick, and one day of death. And so when he last see the recluse, probably sitting under a tree practicing meditation, he was so pleased with the life of a monk that he decided that he must be like him, he must become a monk, and in order to become a monk he must renounce his palace, his parents, his wife, and so on. So he went back to the palace, and then the good news, or for him the bad news, awaited him. And the good news was that his son has been born to him. So when he heard the news, he was not happy, and he said that a bondage has been born. And the Pali word he used was Rahu. So a Rahu has been born. Because when he got his son, and a son is a strong bondage for him, and it would be more difficult for him to renounce the world when he had a son. So he termed his son as a bondage. And his father, the king, heard what his son, the prince, uttered, and so the grandfather gave the name Rahula to the son of Siddhartha. But Prince Siddhartha decided to renounce the world that very night, and so he didn't even go to see his newborn child and his wife. But about midnight he stole away from the palace, taking only his charioteer with him, and went out of the city and went to a forest and cut his hair and put on the robes and became a recluse. Now, his renunciation was to find a way or a practice to end all suffering, how to find a way to deathlessness. So in the beginning, he went about looking for a teacher, and he first met a teacher named Alarakalama. So that teacher was a famous teacher living in a forest, teaching his students or pupils meditation. So he went to him and asked him to teach him what he had been teaching to his students. And let us call him sage. That sage, Alarakalama, had gained to the third jhana of the immaterial or formless jhana. Now there are 4 or 5 form jhanas and 4 formless jhanas. Jhanas means higher states of consciousness to be obtained only through strong concentration. So that sage had gained to the third stage of higher consciousness called immaterial or formless jhana, and he taught Siddhartha that jhana, and Siddhartha soon got that jhana. And after getting the jhana and staying with that teacher, he came to the conclusion that although it is a very high form of jhana, it did not lead to the cessation of suffering. And so he asked his teacher whether he has any more to teach him. And the teacher said, "That's all I know. So what I know, you know, and what you know, I know. So you are an intelligent man, and so let us lead this group of students together." Maybe Prince Siddhartha lived with him for some time, but later he left him because what he was looking for, what he was searching for, was not that jhana, but some practice or some way that would lead to cessation of all suffering. Later on he met another teacher whose name was Uddaka, the son of Rama. So he met him and he asked about his teaching, and Uddaka was able to impart the knowledge or able to tell him the 4th and highest of the formless jhana. Now Uddaka himself had not attained to that jhana, but his father had attained to that jhana, and so he knew what to practice to attain that jhana. But at that time, when Bodhisattva went to him, he had not attained that jhana. So he told Bodhisattva about the method, and so Bodhisattva practiced that method, and he attained to the 4th formless jhana. So after attaining formless jhana, he came to know that it still is not what he was searching for, because although it is the highest of the jhanas, it still does not lead to the final liberation from all suffering. And so, although he was offered a place of honor with the teacher to lead the students, he left that second teacher too. So after that he was on his own, and he went to a place where there was a pleasant grove, quiet and serene, and there was maybe a little river or stream with clear water running, and with a village not far away. So he decided to stay at that place and to practice what he thought to be the right or the correct method. So staying there, he practiced what are known as austerities. Since he had no teacher at that time, he was just doing it on his own. And at that time, people admire the practice of self-mortification. And people thought that only self-mortification can lead to final liberation from suffering. So he practiced he practiced self-mortification at that place. And first, he related his practice later in his life on, say, 2 occasions. So, according to those records, he practiced first suppressing his thoughts by his mind, forcefully suppressing his thoughts, maybe distracting thoughts by his mind. But by this practice, he suffered only pain, and he couldn't get any good results from that practice. Now, that practice is mentioned later in one of the suttas by the Buddha himself, when he talked about getting rid of distracting thoughts. But the Venerable Mahasi Sayadaw suggested that although they are described in the same words, the method used by Bodhisattva at that time might be different from what he taught later after becoming the Buddha. Because if that was the practice of Bodhisattva was the right one, then he would have become a Buddha at that time. But since he did not become a Buddha, but he just suffered from pain, it might not be the correct method as stated later in the sutta on removal of distracting thoughts. So anyhow, he first practiced suppressing his mind, his thoughts by his mind, and he couldn't get any results. And later, he tried controlling his breath. He did not breathe through his nose and through his mouth, and he checked the breath. Then he suffered a lot of pain in his body, and also it is said that wind going out of his ear, and he heard something like a roaring thunder. And later, he closed his ears also. So when he closed his ears also, the wind got to his head, and so he suffered as though somebody piercing him with needles, or somebody were putting a leather belt around his head, and then pressing against his head. That means he suffered a lot of headache through that practice. And later on, he decided to fast altogether, not to eat anything at all. So at that time, it is said that the deities came to him and told him, if you do not take food at all, then we will inject heavenly nutriment, say, through the pores of your skin. So then he said, if I were to claim to be fasting and then accept the heavenly nutriment injected into my body, then I would be telling a lie. So I will not avoid eating altogether. So he reduced eating, and he ended with eating only a handful of bean soup a day. So when he reduced his intake of food to such an extent, his body became emaciated and his eyes sunk in, so that it is like water in a deep well, and then his muscles and blood became emaciated, and so only the skins and sinews show. I think you have seen the picture of Bodhisattva practicing austerities with sinews showing and the ribs, and actually he has no abdomen at that time. And he said that when I try to touch my touch my abdomen, I happen to touch my spinal cord. And when I try to touch my back, on the spine, he happened to touch the abdomen. So he was so thin and emaciated, and his skin color became black. So people who saw him at that time said, oh, Sayadaw was a black man, or something like that. Actually, his natural color was that of, it is said, that golden color, so yellow. And when he tried to void evacuate or to make water, it was so painful that he fell down. But he persisted in practicing these austerities with the hope that he would gain enlightenment through these practices. But he might be practicing this for almost all of his 6 years in the forest. So in the 6th year, maybe towards the end of the 6th year, he thought to himself, I have been practicing these austerities for many years, and those who practiced these austerities in the past, those Brahmins and recluses, could not have practiced more than I do now. And those who will be practicing in the future, these austerities, will not be able to do more than I am doing now. And those who are practicing right at this moment in other places could not have practiced or suffered more than I can suffer. So, since I have been suffering much and I could not make any progress, maybe my practice was wrong. There might be some other way, say, to gain enlightenment. So when he was reviewing his practice and he decided that it was wrong, then he remembered one incident in his life, and that happened when he was maybe about a month or 2 old. So when he was about that age, his father, the king, participated in a plowing ceremony. So to promote cultivation, kings have these plowing ceremonies in which they themselves take the plow and then plow for some time with other maybe common people. So when the king went to that ceremony, he took his son, and Bodhisattva, and then he left his son with nurses under a rose apple tree. It was surrounded by a fence and then covered. Since it was a gala performance in which the king himself participated, the nurses wanted to see the celebrations themselves. So when he was about that age, his father, the king, participated in a plowing ceremony. So to promote cultivation, kings have these plowing ceremonies in which they themselves take the plow and then plow for some time with other maybe common people. So when the king went to that ceremony, he took his son, and Bodhisattva, and then he left his son with nurses under a rose apple tree. It was surrounded by a fence and then covered. Since it was a gala performance in which the king himself participated, the nurses wanted to see the celebrations themselves, and so they left the child under the tree and thought that the child was sleeping. So they went to see the ceremonies. And they were absorbed in the ceremony, and only after some time did they remember the prince, and so they went to see the prince. So when they went to see the prince, they were surprised to see the prince sitting in a sitting position and practicing meditation, actually getting into the first jhana. So it is said that when the prince didn't see anybody around, he sat up and sat in a cross-legged posture and practiced breathing meditation, and he gained the first jhana. It may be incredible or unbelievable for a child of 1 or 2 months practicing meditation and getting into the state of jhana. But if we consider the tremendous amount of perfections he had accumulated in his past lives, I think it is not impossible. It may be very, very rare, but it is not impossible. So the Bodhisattva was, say, sitting in meditation in jhana, in trance at that time. So when the nurses saw him, they were surprised, and then they went to the king and reported it to the king. So the king hastened to the place of his son, and when he saw his son sitting in that position, he bowed down to his son, saying, "This is the second time I bow down to you." So the first time was when, after the birth of the child, an ascetic, maybe his tutor, an ascetic visited him. And when the ascetic visited him, the king tried to make his son bow down to the ascetic. And to the surprise of all, the feet of the child went up on the head of the ascetic, it is said. So the ascetic paid homage to the child, and at that time too, the king himself paid homage to his child. So that was the second time when the king paid homage to his son when his son was meditating. So he remembered that incident, and he remembered also that he was very peaceful, he was very happy at that time. And so he asked himself, this must be the right way for the attainment of enlightenment. And then he asked himself, are you afraid of trying to get that jhana again? Then he said to himself, no. So he decided to practice breathing meditation to get jhana. But at that time his body was so thin, he was so weak, that it was impossible to practice meditation in that condition. So he decided to take food again. Now, when he was practicing these austerities, there were 5 ascetics who were attending to him. And one of these ascetics was a Brahmin who predicted that Sayadaw would become the Buddha. So about 7 days after the birth of the child, there was a naming ceremony. And at that ceremony, Brahmins were invited and look at the child and say predictions. And so the other 7 Brahmins said that the child would either become a universal monarch or a Buddha. But the last one, who was said to be the youngest of them, put up one finger and said, the person possessing such, distinguished marks would surely become the Buddha. He would not live in a household life, so he will surely become the Buddha. And after that, he talked other ascetics into going with him to the forest. And so he with other 4 Brahmins went to the forest, became ascetics, and then attending to the needs of Prince Siddhartha when he was practicing austerities. So they were just waiting for Siddhartha to become the Buddha so that they can easily get enlightenment with Buddha's help. So when the Prince Siddhartha was practicing austerities, they were very much impressed and they thought it was the right way. But when Prince Siddhartha decided to take food again, normal food again, and maybe actually took food, they were disillusioned. So they thought that Sayadaw has fallen away from the good practice and he has reverted to the life of luxury. They thought just eating food in the forest was a life of luxury. So they thought that way, and then in disgust they left him there and went to a place near the city of Benares. So Bodhisattva was left alone at that time. And then he took food again, and maybe after about 15 days, his body became strong enough to practice meditation. And so on the full moon day of May, early morning, he sat under the Bodhi tree, and at that time there was a lady called Sujata. She had made a wish to the tree spirit that if I am wedded to a man of equal rank and the same caste, and if my firstborn is a son, then I will make a great offering to you. And whether it was through the power of the tree spirit or not, she was married to a man of the same rank, and she had a son. The first child was a son. So she arranged to make an offering to the tree spirit. Now Prince Siddhartha was sitting under the tree that morning. So the Sujata sent a slave woman to go and see the tree, and when she saw the Prince Siddhartha, not yet the Buddha, she thought it was the tree spirit showing himself to them. So she went back and told that, "Oh, tree spirit has shown himself to you." So they went and offered milk rice to the would-be Buddha. So Prince Siddhartha accepted the food, and making them into 49 small lumps, he ate all 49 of them. That was the last meal he took in 49 days. So after that he didn't take food for 49 days. So maybe one lump for each day he took. And then in the evening he spent the day in some place near the Bodhi tree, and so in the evening he went towards the Bodhi tree, and he met a man, a grass cutter, and that man offered him some grass, because it was customary in those times for the recluses to sit or to sleep on a bed of grass. So Bodhisattva took the grass and then spread it under the Bodhi tree and sat on the grass and sat in the cross-legged posture, and then made up his mind that until I become a Buddha, I will not break this sitting posture. So I will not stand up, or I will not move, but I will be in this cross-legged position until I became the Buddha. And then he practiced breathing meditation. And after a while he reached the first jhana, and then the second jhana, and then the third jhana, and then the fourth jhana. And during the first watch of the night, he gained the higher knowledge, or we call it supernormal knowledge, of seeing his past lives. So by the power of that knowledge, he could see his innumerable past lives as though he saw them on a screen. So that was the first supernormal knowledge he gained that night. Then he went on practicing, and during the second watch of the night, he gained another supernormal knowledge by which he saw beings dying from one existence and being reborn in another. And he also saw that this being, did something good in this life, and so he is reborn in a better existence. But this being that did something bad here, and so he is reborn in miserable state, and so on. And so this gaining of knowledge, seeing beings dying and being reborn, helped him, to teach the law of karma. So his teaching of law of karma is not based upon just logical thinking, but his direct seeing of beings being dying and then reborn in different existences. So this knowledge he got during the second watch of the night. After that, during the third watch of the night, he first contemplated on the dependent origination. So dependent origination was known to him even before he became the Buddha. So he went through the different stages, different links in the dependent origination, and practicing vipassana on every link. So the first link is ignorance. So he practiced vipassana on ignorance, and then he practiced vipassana on formations and so on, back and forth, back and forth. And so at the end of the last watch, just about at dawn, he became the Buddha. He became enlightened as the Buddha. And so he became what is called the Supreme Enlightened One. And with the gaining of Buddhahood came the omniscience and also what is called the great compassion or karuna to him. So it was actually on the night or just before or just at the dawn of the day after the full moon day of May that he became the Buddha, the fully enlightened one. Now after becoming the Buddha, he spent 7 weeks under the Bodhi tree and around the Bodhi tree. He did not teach anything at that time because there was nobody. Although there were two merchants who met him, and during these weeks he did not teach them any discourse. So he spent 7 weeks under and around the Bodhi tree, and at the beginning of the 8th week he thought of teaching what he had experienced and what he had realized. And then seeing that beings are bound up with attachment, being take delight in attachment, he thought it would be very difficult for these people to see the Dhamma I have seen. So his mind inclines towards not teaching. But the Brahma Sahambati came to him and requested him that there are beings who could understand you, who had little dust in their eyes, and so asked the Buddha to teach. And Buddha said, I have also this understanding, and so I will teach. And then, after giving, promise to the Brahma, he thought of whom to teach. So the first that came to his mind was the Alara Kalama, under whom he had got the third material jhana. But when he thought about him, he knew that that person had died 7 days ago. And after his death, he was to be reborn in the formless Brahmas. Formless Brahma means only the mind exists there, no eye, no ear, and so on. And so he could not take advantage of seeing the Buddha and listening or hearing the Buddha. Next, he thought of the second teacher, Uddaka. And then he came to know that that person died just last night. So he missed the great opportunity of one night. And next he thought of teaching his 5 disciples, his 5 attendants. He said, they were good to me, they took care of me when I was practicing austerities. And so he decided to teach them, and he went to them on foot. And it is stated in the books that the journey was 18 yojanas away. 18 yojanas means about 140 miles. And in the commentaries it is said that he left his place early morning on the full moon day of July, and he reached there in the evening. But Mahasi Sayadaw suggests that it might not be the case, because Buddha did not go miraculously. Buddha did not fly through the air because he wanted to meet one person on his way. So he walked. So if he walked, he could not have covered 140 miles in a day. So it may be he walked about 20 miles or maybe 30 miles a day. So it may take him 4 or 5 days. Anyway, so he went to them, and when they saw him coming, they said to themselves, hey, Siddhartha is coming, and he has fallen away from the practice, and now he is coming to us. So we will not pay respects to him. We will not greet him. We will not take his robes and bowl. We will not have water for him to wash his feet and so on. But we will just have a seat. And if he wishes, he may sit there. So they made this agreement among them. Then Buddha was approaching, and as the Buddha was approaching and reaching their place, they could not stand on their own agreement, and one greeted the Buddha, and the one took robes and bowls of the Buddha, and the other gave him water to wash his feet. Now, in the commentaries, it is said that Buddha knew of their minds, and so Buddha practiced metta, loving kindness towards them when he was approaching them. Specific pervasion. Now there are two kinds of loving kindness. Descending to all beings, that is called unspecific pervasion. But to a particular person or to a particular group, it is called specific pervasion. So Buddha used that specific pervasion and sent his thoughts of loving kindness to 5 disciples, and that is why they could not stand on their own agreement and did the things. So after reaching them, then he sat on the seat, but still they were not friendly to him and they were not polite to him. They were talking to him, calling him friend, and speaking to him, calling his personal name. So Buddha said, "Now I have become a Buddha. Don't address the Buddha or Tathagata as Avuso, friend, and don't call him by his personal name. I have become a Buddha." Then he said, "How can you become a Buddha? Even with severe austerities and practices, you could not become the Buddha. Now you have fallen away from this practice, and you have reversed to luxurious way of living, and so how can you become a Buddha?" So Buddha told them 3 times, and they refused to believe 3 times. So in the end, Buddha said, "Now, did I ever say something like this to you when you were attending to me when I was practicing meditation?" And they thought, yeah, he had never told us anything like that, so it must be true. So at that time, they have confidence in the Buddha, and with confidence came reverence. So when the Buddha asked that, their answer was, had I told you something like that? He said, "No, Venerable Sir." Now they call him Venerable Sir, but formerly they called him just friends or something like that. So Buddha was able to convince them of his enlightenment, and so on that evening, Buddha taught them this sermon, and it is called "Turning the Wheel of Dhamma," or setting in motion the wheel of Dhamma. And it is described in the commentaries that when the Buddha was teaching when the Buddha began to teach this, the sun was halfway down and the moon was halfway up. So there was a moon in the east, halfway up the horizon, and the sun was setting in the western horizon. So at that time, Buddha taught the first sermon to the 5 disciples. And at the end of the sutta, the first one, Kontanya, became a Sotapanna, and then on the next day another one, next day another one, and so on. And so on the 5th day, Buddha taught them the sutta on no self, on selflessness, and they all became arahants. So we haven't got into the sutta yet. Just the introduction took about 1 hour. So Buddha taught in this sutta, or described briefly the 2 extremes, and then the middle path, and then the 4 noble truths. Since his first sermon, I think he had to teach them the 4 noble truths, because after this sermon, during the 45 years of his ministry, whatever Buddha taught was contained in these 4 noble truths. So nothing Buddha taught was outside of the 4 noble truths, and there is nothing to be known outside the Four Noble Truths. And so the Four Noble Truths are important subjects in the teachings of the Buddha. And also in that sutta, Buddha said, so long as I did not see or I did not know these Four Noble Truths, I did not see them in 12 aspects, so long did I not claim to be the fully enlightened one. Only when I realized these Four Noble Truths in 12 aspects do I declare myself to be a fully enlightened one. So it is a criterion for, say, being a Buddha or not. If anybody is to be a Buddha, then he must see these Four Noble Truths, really see these Four Noble Truths in all their aspects. And so this sutta, discourse, is important, and I don't know how many days it will take to talk about this sutta. And there is a book called The Three Cardinal Discourses of the Buddha, and the first one is, you guess, this sutta, and the second is the sutta on soullessness, and the third is a fire sermon. So there are three important suttas, and they are the first three suttas. And this is a book of Mahasi Sayadaw. Actually, Mahasi Sayadaw's books were talks originally, and they were transcribed and then put in a book form. This is Mahasi Sayadaw's talks on this sutta. The sutta itself occupies in this book not even four full pages. But it took a book of this size to explain, because when Mahasi Sayadaw talk about discourses, he has a very admirable ability, say, to relate the teachings in the discourses to the actual practice. So he always talked from the point of view of vipassana meditation. He was a very successful and very famous vipassana teacher, and so whenever he talked with reference to the real practice of vipassana meditation. So if you want to know fully about the sutta, then I would recommend this book to you, but unfortunately it is not easily available. Some people in Malaysia reprinted this book for free distribution, so it may be available from them. I don't know, but it is the original one printed in Burma. So tomorrow and then on the days following, I will continue my talk on the Dhammacakka Pavattana Sutta, or the first sermon of the Buddha, by listening to the account which leads to the utterance of this sutta, and by giving this talk, may we all attain what the Buddha and the five disciples attained at the end of the discourse of the setting in motion of the wheel of Dhamma.
Thank you very much.